Welcome to the deep dive. Forget the headlines for a bit. We're going straight to the source today. We're dissecting a fresh batch of presidential actions from early April 2025. It's a stack of executive orders, presidential memoranda. Quite a lot just dropped.
Yeah, quite a bit to get through.
Think of this as your rapid intel briefing. We want to give you the essential breakdown of what the administration is actually trying to do. Covers a lot of ground energy, trade, defense, cybersecurity.
And even showerheads. Can't forget those.
Right, even showerheads. So our mission today, unpack the real objectives, the intended game plan, and, the potential shifts these actions could trigger.
Exactly. We've got, well, a pretty compelling set of documents here. They offer a real-time look at the administration's current priorities, their strategic direction. We'll try to pull out the crucial details, connect the dots for you, hopefully give you a clearer line of sight on the bigger picture that's taking shape.
Okay, let's dive right in then. First up, a presidential memorandum from April 9th. It's titled, Addressing Risks from Chris Krebs and Government Censorship. Now, this starts off invoking the federal government's constitutional duty, free speech.
Yeah.
What's the core argument they're laying out here?
Well, memorandum, it kicks off by affirming that role, protecting free speech. But it pivots pretty quickly. It makes a claim of unlawful censorship by, quote, elitist leaders within the government.
Okay.
Specifically targeting political opponents and what the memo calls erroneous narratives on, well, key public issues. This really sets the stage for the specific accusations coming next.
And those accusations really zero in on Christopher Krebs, doesn't it? The former head of CISA.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly is he being accused of here?
Krebs is, identified right in the memo, calls him a significant bad faith actor. Claims he, quote, weaponized and abused his government authority through censorship while he was leading CISA. The memo then details claims that under him, CISA censored speech about the 2020 election and also about the COVID-19 pandemic.
How specifically?
It alleges CISA suppressed conservative viewpoints, basically labeling them as disinformation, and that it pressured social media platforms to, fall in line with that viewpoint.
The memo doesn't stop there, though. It also brings up the Hunter Biden laptop controversy and the 2020 election integrity again.
Right. It asserts that CISA, under Krebs, covertly worked to blind the American public to the controversy surrounding Hunter Biden's laptop. That's a direct quote. And furthermore, it accuses Krebs of falsely denying the 2020 election was rigged or stolen, and of dismissing claims about widespread election malfeasance, voting machine vulnerabilities.
Oh.
And finally, it states, Krebs tried to discredit views on COVID-19 that didn't align with CISA's official take.
And the directives that follow these accusations, they're pretty concrete. This isn't just airing grievances, is it?
Not at all. Very concrete. The first directive, all executive departments, agencies, immediately begin the process to revoke any active security clearance Krebs holds. Immediately. And beyond that, the Attorney General, the DNI, other relevant agencies, they're directed to suspend clearances for individuals at entities associated with Krebs.
Like who?
It specifically names SentinelOne as an example, pending a review, of course, to see if those clearances are actually in the national interest.
Okay, and there's also a broader review ordered, looking into Krebs's past actions and CISA itself.
Yes, a comprehensive review. The AG and the Secretary of Homeland Security are tasked with looking into Krebs's activities as a government employee and CISA's activities over the last 6 years.
What's the focus of that review?
Specifically looking for instances where conduct might have violated federal employee suitability standards or involved unauthorized disclosure of classified info or, importantly, was inconsistent with Executive Order 14149.
Which is the one about restoring free speech and ending federal censorship.
That's the one. And after this review, they need to submit a joint report with concrete recommendations for any remedial or preventative actions needed.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk trade. April 8th, an executive order. Amendment to reciprocal tariffs and updated duties as applied to low-value imports from the People's Republic of China. This is clearly building on earlier moves, right? Can you sort of lay out the sequence?
Definitely building. This order is a direct result of actions service started by Executive Order 14257. That was the one declaring a national emergency over trade deficits, and it imposed tariffs.
Right.
And crucially, Section 4B of that order said, if any trading partner retaliated against those tariffs, the U.S. could hit back with further modifications.
Okay, makes sense.
And adding to that, remember Executive Order 14256, that already removed the de minimis, the low-value shipment exemption for certain imports from China linked to the opioid supply chain.
Got it. So what was the specific trigger for this new amendment? What did China do?
According to the text of this new EO, China responded to that first order, 14257, by announcing its own 34% tariff on all goods imported from the U.S. effective April 10, 2025. So this new U.S. order explicitly states its measures are a, quote, necessary and appropriate response to China's retaliation.
So tit for tat, basically. How does this new EO actually increase the duties on Chinese goods? What are the specifics?
It amends the HTS-US, that's the Harmonized Tariff Schedule, the big list classifying traded goods. It increases the existing tariffs on certain Chinese goods, specifically the ones initially set at 34% under heading 9903.01.63. Those are raised to 84%.
84%, wow.
Yeah, and there's a corresponding adjustment made to a note in the HTS-US legal text as well.
It's not just the general tariff rate changing, though, is it? There are also changes to the de minimis tariffs, the ones on low-value imports from China.
That's right, hitting those small packages, too. The order increases the ad valorem duty, that's the tariff, based on the value on those low-value imports from China. It was previously set at 30% by EO 14256. Now it jumps significantly up to 90%.
90% on low-value items.
90%. Plus, it increases the per-postal item duty for these imports. The rate that was set to kick in around May 2nd goes from $50 up to $75, and the rate effective June 1st jumps even more, from $50 up to $150 per item.
That's a huge jump for those small packages.
Absolutely. It makes those low-value imports much, much more expensive.
Okay, staying on trade, but a clarification.
Huh.
We also have a presidential memorandum from April 11th. It's about clarifying exceptions under that original EO 14257, specifically regarding semiconductors. Why was this needed now?
Well, EO 14257 and the follow-up orders on Paris, they included this sort of blanket exception for semiconductors from the new duties. This memo basically just provides a much more precise definition. It lists the specific HTS-US headings and subheadings that actually qualify for this exception.
So it's getting really granular now, defining exactly what counts as a semiconductor for tariff purposes.
Exactly. The memo lists a whole range of HTS-US codes. Things related to computers, telecom gear, integrated circuits, other electronic components. It's quite detailed.
Yeah.
And it explicitly says the official HTS-US will be modified to reflect these specific classifications.
Okay, makes sense. And what happens if duties were already collected on these specific semiconductor imports that are now being explicitly exempted?
Good question. The memo is clear on that. Any duties collected on these specific semiconductor imports after April 5th, 2025, under the authority of 14257, and the related orders will be refunded. Yeah, those refunds will be processed through the standard CVP procedures.
All right, let's pivot now. A proclamation, April 9th, Education and Sharing Day, U.S.A. 2025. This feels quite different from trade wars and security memos.
Right.
What's the focus here?
Yeah, definitely a different tone. This proclamation officially designates April 9th, 2025 as Education and Sharing Day. And the proclamation itself says the day is inspired by the life and, the legacy of Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the Lubavitcher Rebbe.
Right. And it emphasizes his contributions, doesn't it? What aspects are highlighted?
Yes, strongly emphasizes his role in rebuilding and expanding the Chabad Lubavitch movement after the Holocaust. It highlights his global campaign focused on spiritual outreach and his commitment to principles like teaching, good deeds, charity, things like that. The proclamation also notes Chabad's global presence, its community centers, seeing them as sort of tangible results of his message.
There's also a mention of a personal connection for the president in this one, isn't there?
That's right. It specifically mentions the president visiting the Rebbe Des Ohel, his resting place, on the anniversary of the October 7th, 2023 attacks. Notes the president reportedly drew spiritual guidance from that visit, and it connects this to his stated commitment to combating anti-Semitism and bringing home hostages taken during those attacks.
Okay. Now, for something that, as you mentioned earlier, might seem a bit out of left field, an executive order, also April 9th, on maintaining acceptable water pressure in showerheads. What's driving this one? Is this really about shower pressure?
Well, yes and no. The order itself frames its purpose as rolling back what it calls overregulation that restricts personal freedom. It uses the definition of showerhead as like the prime example of this supposed overreach.
Yeah.
It directly criticizes the Obama-Biden administrations for issuing what it describes as these lengthy, overly complex regulations defining a showerhead.
It actually cites specific Federal Register notices for those old rules, right?
It does, yeah. mentions notices from 2013 and 2021, and it contrasts these, multi-thousand-word definitions with the much shorter definition in the Oxford English Dictionary, basically arguing the old regs were just excessive.
So the directive is pretty straightforward then. Undo those definitions.
Precisely. It formally directs the Secretary of Energy to rescind that 2021 definition of showerhead that's codified in the Code of Federal Regulations. And it also states that the usual notice and public comment period required for these kinds of changes is, quote, unnecessary in this case.
Interesting.
Yeah, and the rescission becomes effective 30 days after it's published in the Federal Register.
Okay, moving on to a topic with potentially, well, much larger implications, a presidential memorandum from April 11th. Military mission for sealing the southern border of the United States and repelling invasions. The title itself is quite something.
It is strong language, yeah. The memo starts by asserting the southern border is currently under attack. And it argues for a more direct, a more substantial military role in securing it. It directly references Executive Order 14167, issued earlier this year, which assigned the military those explicit missions, repelling invasions, protecting U.S. territorial integrity. This new memo basically spells out how they're supposed to do that.
And it gives much more specific detail on how this bigger military role plays out on the ground.
Exactly. It outlines a policy. Give the Department of Defense the authority to use and legal jurisdiction over specific federal lands along the southern border.
Which land?
It identifies them, but explicitly excludes federal Indian reservations. The stated purpose is to facilitate military activities, including building border barriers, deploying detection tech, monitoring equipment, that sort of thing.
It also mentions formally transferring jurisdiction and designating some areas as national defense areas. What's the significance there?
Yes, it provides for the formal transfer of legal jurisdiction over these lands to DoD, which essentially lets these areas function like military installations under military authority, military law.
Okay.
And it authorizes the Secretary of Defense to formally designate them as national defense areas, which has specific legal implications for access and control. The Secretary of the Interior is also specifically told to allow use of parts of the Roosevelt Reservation for these military purposes.
The memo also brings up a previous national emergency declaration at the border and cites a specific law to back this up.
Yes, it directly references Proclamation 1886, the one declaring the border emergency. And crucially, it invokes 43 U.S.C. Section 155. Now, this particular law gives the Secretary of the Interior authority to withdraw public lands for DoD use during a declared national emergency. And importantly, it does so without being subject to some of the usual limitations on land withdrawals. That's a key legal justification cited here for handing land over to DoD.
And what kind of military activities are we talking about here? Are there any rules of engagement mentioned for using force?
The memo gives pretty broad authority to the Secretary of Defense to decide what military activities are necessary for the mission. These have to be consistent with existing laws governing military authority on installations. It also explicitly states that armed forces members operating under this directive will follow rules for the use of force prescribed by the Secretary of Defense.
So SecDef sets the rules.
Correct. And finally, the memo outlines a phased implementation. Starts with a limited sector of federal lands, but with the possibility of expanding later.
Okay. Shifting focus back to defense, but this time looking inward at how the military buys its stuff. An executive order from April 9th on modernizing defense acquisitions and spurring innovation in the defense industrial base. The order itself says the current system isn't fast or adaptable enough. What's the main argument for this big overhaul?
The basic argument is that the current defense acquisition system, well, it needs a major transformation to make sure the U.S. military gets the most advanced, the most lethal capabilities, but also in a timely way, cost-effectively. The stated policy is really to accelerate defense procurement, revitalize the defense industrial base, emphasis on speed, flexibility, and just getting things done execution.
So what are some of the key directives in this order meant to achieve that? Speeding up defense buying sounds ambitious.
It is ambitious, and there are several big actions mandated. First, within 60 days, the Secretary of Defense has to submit a detailed plan on how to reform the existing processes. This plan must prioritize using existing, more flexible acquisition tools more often, things like commercial solutions, other transactions authority, or OTA.
Right. The OTA bypasses some traditional rules.
Exactly. Also policies from the Rapid Capabilities Office and the Adaptive Acquisition Framework that's a more iterative approach. Plus, the order directs a big process review of all the support roles in the acquisition workforce to cut out unnecessary tasks, streamline decision-making.
And there's also a focus on managing risk in these programs and the internal regulations themselves, right?
Yes, it calls for creating a configuration steering board. The idea is to manage and mitigate risk better for major programs, and it directs the Secretary of Defense to review and revise all relevant DoD acquisition regulations. Goal is to speed things up. It even sets a 10-for-1 rule. For every new supplemental regulation, 10 old ones should be targeted for elimination.
10 for 1. Okay.
Yeah,
The order also specifically talks about the acquisition workforce itself, the people involved. That seems crucial.
absolutely. Within 120 days, SecDef has to develop a plan to reform, right-size, and train the workforce better. This includes things like changing performance evaluations to incentivize using these innovative methods, maybe taking more calculated risks, analyzing staffing levels, setting up field training teams with experts in these faster authorities, just generally fostering a culture that rewards speed and adaptability.
And finally, this order includes a pretty major review of all existing defense acquisition programs. What's the scope there? What could happen?
Within just 90 days, SecDef has to complete a comprehensive review of all major defense acquisition programs, the MDTs. The main purpose is to see if they align with these new goals of speed and efficiency. Any program found to be way behind schedule, way over budget, not meeting key performance goals, or just misaligned with priorities, well, it could be identified as a candidate for cancellation or major restructuring.
Cancellation is on the table.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
And after reviewing the MDAPs, there's a plan to review all other major systems too. Plus, a review of the Joint Capabilities Integration and Development System, JCIDs, the requirements process within 180 days, aiming to streamline the whole acquisition lifecycle from the very beginning. And just to be clear, the order even defines key terms like Adaptive Acquisition Framework, OTA, JCIDs to make sure everyone's on the same page.
Okay, we're seeing that recurring theme of trade again. Another EO, April 9th, modifying reciprocal tariff rates to reflect trading partner retaliation and alignment. This sounds like the next move in this ongoing trade chess game. Break this down for us.
Exactly, it's the next move. This order acknowledges China's further retaliation after the April 8th order. Remember, that April 8th order raised U.S. tariffs on China to 84% because China had put a 34% tariff on U.S. goods.
Right.
Well, after the U.S. went to 84%, China apparently responded with its own 84% tariff on all U.S. goods.
Okay, so escalating again.
Escalating again. So this new executive order escalates further, raising U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods from that 84% level to a new high of 125%.
125%, but it's not just about hitting China harder, is it? The title mentions alignment with other partners. What's that about?
That's a really critical piece here. It goes back to a provision in the original EO 14257. That provision allowed for potentially decreasing tariffs for trading partners who step up, address non-reciprocal trade practices, and basically align with the U.S. on broader economic and national security issues. This order states that over 75 trading partners, explicitly not China, have engaged with the U.S. on these kinds of issues.
Okay, so what happens for these aligned partners then? Do their tariffs change?
Yes, they do. The order puts in place a temporary suspension of those individual ad valorem duties that were imposed by EO 14257 just for these aligned partners. It's a 90-day suspension starting April 10th, running until July 9th, 2025.
So a temporary break for them?
A temporary break, but with a catch. During this 90-day period, imports from these aligned partners will face a new, additional ad valorem duty of 10%.
Ah, so not completely free.
Not completely free, but presumably better than the original rates. And the existing exceptions from EO 14257 still apply, even with this new 10% duty. The order also, separately, includes further increases in those de minimis tariff rates just for goods from China, mirrors the previous structure but hikes them higher again. The ad valorem rate for low-value Chinese goods goes from 90% up to 120%, and the per postal item duties increase again too.
Okay, keeping the pressure high on China while maybe offering an alternative path for others.
Seems to be the strategy outlined here, yeah.
Right. April 9th also saw 2 proclamations recognizing specific national days. National Crime Victims' Rights Week 2025 and National Former Prisoner of War Recognition Day 2025. Let's start with the crime victims one. Key messages there.
This proclamation declares April 6th through 12th as National Crime Victims' Rights Week. The message is one of strong support for crime victims, and it emphasizes this link between freedom and safety. It includes a critique of what it calls soft on-crime policies, asserts violent crime rose significantly under the previous administration, and it specifically calls President Biden's commuting of death row sentences a, quote, devastating betrayal of innocent victims.
It also seems to link crime to immigration and border security.
Yes, it explicitly does. It cites figures for illegal alien encounters and gotaways during the Biden administration. References the National Emergency Declaration at the border, the start of the largest deportation operation in history. Also highlights signing the Laken Riley Act, mandating detention for certain criminal aliens, and reiterates commitment to stronger legal protections for police, calls for a new crime bill tough on repeat offenders.
Okay. Now, the National Former Prisoner of War Recognition Day proclamation, what's the focus there?
This one designates April 9th as National Former Prisoner of War Recognition Day. The main focus is solemn remembrance for American service members captured in war, emphasizes their sacrifice, acknowledges the tragedy of captivity. It also includes a statement of the current administration's commitment to caring for veterans, with a particular focus on former POWs.
This one also includes a critique of the previous administration regarding veterans, doesn't it?
Yes, specifically on the issue of veteran homelessness. It contrasts the past record with the current administration's stated commitment to eradicating veteran homelessness. Includes a pledge that the government will never betray those who served. Notes the upcoming 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army founding, promising continued support for POWs, their families, and the armed forces.
Okay. Back to executive orders. April 8th. Protecting American energy from state overreach. The title signals friction between federal and state energy policy. What's the core argument from the administration here?
The fundamental argument is that the administration is committed to maximizing U.S. energy production, oil, gas, coal, nuclear, renewables, the works. And it asserts that some state and local governments are overstepping their authority, enacting regulations that hinder this goal. The specific concern is that these state rules are burdening interstate energy commerce, hindering production on federal lands, undermining national security, and ultimately driving up energy costs for everyone.
Does it give examples of these state actions they see as problematic?
Yes, it cites several specific examples of what it calls state overreach. Things like laws in New York and Vermont imposing fines for past greenhouse gas emissions, California's carbon cap and trade system, state and local actions causing permitting delays for energy projects, climate change lawsuits against energy companies. The argument is that these state laws basically undermine federalism, letting the preferences of a few states negatively impact the energy and economy of all the others.
And the directive to address this state overreach seems quite direct. What's being ordered?
Very direct. It orders the Attorney General to identify all state and local laws that are seen as burdening domestic energy production and that might be legally challenged as unconstitutional or preempted by federal law.
Okay.
It specifically prioritizes laws related to ESG initiatives, environmental, social, governance, environmental justice, carbon emissions, carbon penalties. After identifying them, the AG is instructed to take legal action to stop the enforcement of these laws.
So, sue the states, essentially.
That seems to be the implication, yes. Take appropriate legal action. And the AG has to report back within 60 days on actions taken and recommend any further presidential or legislative steps needed.
Okay. Another EO, April 9th. Reforming foreign defense sales to improve speed and accountability. What's the main goal and the thinking behind this one?
The central objective stated here is to create a foreign defense sales system that's both rapid and transparent. The administration believes this is crucial for strengthening alliances and also for invigorating the U.S. defense industrial base. So the policy goals are things like better accountability and transparency, consolidating decision-making, cutting unnecessary rules and regs that cause delays, more government-industry collaboration, and ultimately making the U.S. more competitive in the global arms market.
And the implementation is phased. How does that break down?
Yes, multi-phased. Phase 1, immediate. Fully implement an existing national security presidential memo on arms transfers, reevaluate missile technology control regime restrictions on the most sensitive items, Category 1, and propose updates to the thresholds that trigger congressional notification for arms sales. Phase 2, within 60 days. The Secretary of State develops a priority list of key partner nations receiving U.S. defense gear, and the Secretary of Defense creates a matching list of priority defense items suitable for transfer to them.
But ensuring it doesn't hurt U.S. readiness.
Exactly. Ensuring no negative impact on U.S. readiness and promoting allied burden sharing. That's part of the criteria.
And what about longer-term reforms in foreign defense sales from the CO?
Good question. The order calls for an annual review of those priority partner and item lists. Also mandates a review of the FMS-only list, items only sold government to government, and the broader U.S. munitions list. The goal is to focus protection on just the most sensitive technologies. Within 90 days, plan to improve transparency, ensure exportability is considered early when developing new tech, and consolidate technology security approvals. Longer term, within 120 days, develop a single electronic system to track all direct commercial sales, export licenses, and foreign military sales efforts. And again, like the acquisition EO, it defines key terms like parallel decision-making and exportability for clarity.
All right, now we have another executive order, also April 8th, with a very specific, maybe somewhat controversial focus, reinvigorating America's beautiful clean coal industry and amending Executive Order 14241. The title alone signals strong support for coal.
It absolutely does. The order starts by asserting the critical importance of increasing domestic energy production, all sources, but specifically highlights coal as vital for economic prosperity, national security, and meeting growing electricity demand. It emphasizes coal's abundance, cost-effectiveness in the U.S., its history of employment, its potential for energy independence, and as an export. And yes, it uses the phrase beautiful clean coal to underscore its relevance, especially for meeting demand for manufacturing and those booming AI data centers.
The policy direction seems unequivocally pro-coal, then.
Unambiguously. It explicitly declares coal essential to national and economic security, establishes a national priority to actively support the domestic coal industry. How? By removing federal regulatory barriers seen as hindering it, actively encouraging exports, and ensuring federal policy doesn't discriminate against coal production or coal-fired power plants.
And what specific actions are federal agencies being told to take to make this happen?
Several specific actions. First, the chair of the National Energy Dominance Council is told to designate coal as a mineral under that earlier EO 14241 about increasing mineral production. The Secretaries of Interior, Agriculture, and Energy have 60 days to report on coal resources on federal lands, identify barriers to mining, and propose policies to enable more mining.
Enable mining, okay.
Interior and Agriculture are explicitly told to prioritize coal leasing and expedite the process, including using emergency authorities and faster environmental reviews if needed. Various agency heads across government have 30 days to identify any existing guidance, regulations, programs, policies that seek to transition away from coal.
Find anything anti-coal.
Basically. And then they're instructed to consider revising or rescinding those actions within the next 60 days. Agencies with loan or offtake agreement authority are told to rescind policies discouraging coal investment. The Commerce Secretary is tasked with finding export opportunities, facilitating international deals.
It really does sound like they're trying to cover every angle to boost coal. Anything else significant?
Yes, several other points. Agencies need to identify potential NEPA categorical exclusions to streamline coal projects. Energy Secretary needs to determine if coal used for steel counts as a critical material. Interior Secretary, if metallurgical coal is a critical mineral. Interior, Commerce, and Energy need to identify regions with coal infrastructure suitable for AI data centers and assess expansion potential.
Coal-powered AI centers.
That seems to be the idea being explored. And finally, the Energy Secretary is told to accelerate R&D and commercialization of advanced coal tech, submitting an action plan within 90 days.
Okay. Shifting, again, a very different sector, another major ELO, Restoring America's Maritime Dominance, issued April 9th. This clearly flags concerns about U.S. commercial shipbuilding. What are the key issues raised?
The main issue identified is the significant weakening of U.S. commercial shipbuilding capacity and the maritime workforce. The order blames this on, quote, years of government neglect, leading to a big cost disadvantage compared to competitors, especially China. It throws out a stark statistic. The U.S. builds less than 1% of global commercial ships, while China builds about half.
Less than 1% versus half, that's stark. The order lays out a pretty comprehensive strategy to fix this, right? Talks about a maritime action plan.
Yes, a comprehensive maritime action plan, or MAP, to be submitted within 210 days by various agency heads. The goal is to revitalize and rebuild domestic maritime industries and the workforce. Needs to address several key things. Getting consistent federal funding, making U.S.-flagged, U.S.-built ships commercially competitive, rebuilding the maritime industrial-based shipyards, suppliers, and significantly expanding the skilled maritime workforce. The OMB director coordinates the legislative, regulatory, fiscal homework needed for this MAP.
What are some of the specific actions or focus areas within this big plan?
The Defense Secretary is told to assess options for investing in and expanding the maritime industrial base, shipbuilding, supply chains, repair, ports, workforce. Emphasizes using the Defense Production Act and attracting private capital. SecDef is also told to explore using the Office of Strategic Capital Loan Program for shipbuilding. Commerce, Transportation, Homeland Security secretaries need to identify key maritime components for priority investment, looking at taxpayer ROI and national security impact. It also details actions related to the USTR's Section 301 investigation into China's alleged targeting of maritime, logistics, shipbuilding sectors. Includes gathering info, enforcement, potential tariffs on Chinese ship-to-shore cranes, and other cargo gear.
So tariffs potentially coming for port equipment from China.
Potentially, yes. The Homeland Security Secretary is directed to enforce the harbor maintenance fee on all foreign cargo arriving by ship, even if it comes via Canada or Mexico, and collect other charges, maybe through new laws, possibly including a 10% service fee for inland CBP clearance.
Workforce development and modernizing infrastructure seem key too.
Absolutely critical elements. It mandates creating maritime prosperity zones, like opportunity zones, to incentivize investment in maritime industries, waterfront communities, might offer regulatory relief, geographically diverse. Transportation Secretary has to propose a shipbuilding financial incentives program for the budget. And Transportation Homeland Security need a plan for these prosperity zones within 90 days. Transportation also has to inventory all federal programs supporting the maritime industry. Several agencies need to report in 90 days on addressing workforce challenges via education, training. This includes proposing national maritime scholarships, modernizing mariner credentialing, specific actions to modernize the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy hiring staff, facilities plan, capital plan. Then there's improving how the government buys its own ships. Better forecasting, acquisition reforms, fewer approval layers, less burdensome requirements, using industry standards, American parts. Department of Government Efficiency does a separate review of DOA DDHS vessel buying. Transportation Secretary needs a legislative proposal in 180 days to increase the U.S.-flagged commercial fleet in international trade, while limiting waste, enhancing security. Defense Secretary needs an Arctic strategy in 90 days to secure waterways there.
Securing Arctic waterways.
Yeah. Shipbuilding review in 45 days on increasing participation, reducing cost overruns. Review in 30 days on deregulation for the domestic fleet, port access. Guidance in 90 days on the inactive reserve fleet. And emphasizes interagency coordination for all of this. It's a massive undertaking outlined here.
Truly comprehensive. Okay, one more presidential memorandum, April 7th. Review of proposed United States Steel Corporation acquisition. This revisits a deal that was blocked earlier, right?
That's correct. This memo refers back to the January 3, 2025 order, which prohibited Nippon Steel from acquiring U.S. steel. This new memo directs CFIUS, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, to conduct a completely new review, a de novo review, of that same proposed acquisition.
So CFIUS gets another look, fresh eyes. What's the scope and timeline for this new review?
The memo says the review should be confidential. Follow standard national security review procedures under Section 721 of the Defense Production Act. That includes identifying potential national security risks from the deal and giving the companies a chance to respond to any concerns raised. CFIUS then has 45 days to submit its recommendation. That recommendation needs to say if measures proposed by the companies are sufficient to mitigate identified risks, and it must include the position of each CFIUS member agency.
Okay, so the deal might be back on the table depending on this review.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
Depends on what CFIUS finds and recommends.
Finally, one last executive order from April 8th, strengthening the reliability and security of the United States electric grid. This points to concerns about rising electricity demand. What are the key issues?
Yes. This order highlights what it calls an unprecedented surge in electricity demand. Blames it on tech advancements, especially AI data centers, more manufacturing straining the existing grid capacity. The argument is that grid unreliability threatens both national and economic security. So the stated policy is to ensure grid reliability, resilience, security. And to do that, utilize all available power generation resources, especially those with secure, redundant fuel supplies to meet this growing demand and address that previously declared national energy emergency, EO 14156.
And what specific actions does this EO mandate to actually strengthen the grid?
It directs the Secretary of Energy to streamline the DOE process for issuing emergency orders under Section 202C of the Federal Power Act. Those are the orders used when grid operators foresee temporary supply shortfalls to prevent blackouts. Streamlining includes faster review of applications from generators wanting to run at max capacity during emergencies. Also, Secretary of Energy must develop, within 30 days, a uniform methodology for analyzing current and future reserve margins for all FERC-regulated regions.
A uniform methodology.
Yes. To analyze varied grid conditions based on history, credit generators based on past performance. That methodology has to be published within 90 days. The Secretary also has to set up a process to regularly assess this methodology and identify generators critical to system reliability. And importantly, this protocol must include legal mechanisms, including using Section 202C, to ensure these critical resources are kept online. And to prevent, where appropriate and legal, generators over 50 megawatts from retiring or switching fuels if it reduces their accredited capacity.
So, trying to keep existing power plants, especially reliable ones, from shutting down.
That seems to be a major goal, yes, preventing capacity reduction from critical resources.
Okay, we have one final executive order. This one focuses on a very broad regulatory approach. Zero-based regulatory budgeting to unleash American energy. Sounds like a fundamental shift in how energy regulations are handled. What's the core idea?
The core idea is that the current body of federal regulations, especially in energy, is just too big, too complex, often outdated, and it hinders growth and innovation. The order criticizes the previous administration for supposedly increasing the volume of regulations, significantly citing growth in the Federal Register Code of Federal Regulations. So the main goal is to spur innovation, prosperity, by systematically identifying and getting rid of outdated, unnecessary energy regulations.
And the main tool for this is something called conditional sunset dates. How do those work?
Exactly. The order directs a list of covered agencies, EPA, DOE, FRC, NRC, OSMRE, BLM, BOIM, BFE, FWS, Army Corps, to build a conditional sunset date into their energy production regulations existing and future. A conditional sunset date is defined as the date a regulation automatically dies, ceases to be effective, unless the agency proactively takes steps to extend it.
So regulations expire unless actively saved. What's the initial timeline? How are extensions handled?
For existing covered regulations, the conditional sunset date is set for 1 year after the rule implementing these sunsets takes effect. After that date, the reg is gone unless formally extended. For new covered regulations issued after this order, they must include a sunset date no more than 5 years out. Any future amendments to regulations also have to address their sunset dates.
And extensions?
To extend a sunset date, the agency has to give public notice and allow public comment before the date hits. Extensions can be granted if the agency justifies it, but never for more than 5 years at a time. The order also clarifies that extending a sunset date or letting one expire does not count towards that 10-for-1 regulatory reduction goal from IBO 14192.
Ah, okay. Separate process.
Right. And finally, it tells agency heads to coordinate with their DOGE, Team Leads Department of Government Efficiency, and OMB to implement this. It also notes this order doesn't apply to regulatory permitting regimes authorized by statute.
Well, that was an intense and really comprehensive look at a significant number of presidential actions. Just stepping back, looking at all of these together, what overarching themes are jumping out at you from this flurry of EOs and memos?
Several key themes are pretty clear, I think. There's a really strong, consistent emphasis on achieving what the administration calls American energy independence and dominance, mostly through deregulation and a clear prioritization of fossil fuels, especially coal.
Definitely saw that.
Trade policy is another huge focus. Very assertive, maybe even confrontational stance towards China. But at the same time, an effort to build stronger alignment, maybe offer better terms to other trading partners.
Right, that carrot and stick approach?
Kind of, yeah. Defense is also prominent. Big initiatives to overhaul defense acquisition, strengthen the U.S. defense industrial base, and that notable move towards a much more direct military role at the southern border.
And finally, that issue of free speech, alleged government censorship, clearly addressed in the Krebs memo, indicating it's a priority too. And it's really vital for you, our listeners, to remember. Our entire discussion today, it's been based solely on the official White House documents themselves. We're aiming to give you a direct analysis of the administration's stated intentions and the specific directives being issued.
Precisely. These documents, they offer a direct window into the administration's current thinking, its priorities, the specific policy levers it plans to pull to achieve its goals across these really diverse critical areas.
So as you're processing all this information, it's probably worth taking a moment. Consider what the potential impacts, short-term and long-term, might be. Across different sectors of the economy, society, these are significant policy shifts outlined here.
Absolutely. Each one has the potential to create pretty substantial changes. And, taking the time to look at the specific details in the documents yourself, that can provide a much deeper, more nuanced understanding of those potential future impacts.
And maybe this deep dive has sparked some more curiosity in you. We'd certainly encourage you to delve into the full text of these orders and memoranda if you can. There are always nuances, details we just couldn't cover in our time today. Engaging with those primary sources directly is always valuable.
Indeed. Forming your own informed opinions, it really starts with going to the source material, doing your own critical analysis.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, maybe consider this. What are the potential long-term implications of undertaking so many significant executive actions in such a concentrated burst? What might this approach to governing suggest about the dynamics between the executive branch and other branches right now? And ultimately, how might these actions affect the diverse, sometimes competing interests of the American people? It certainly gives us all a lot to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.